We are thrilled to have three panel presenters with the Family Caregivers Network of British Columbia, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary. The Family Caregiver Network of BC was the first organization of its kind in Canada dedicated to education, support, and being a voice for family caregivers. MacLean, Executive Director, is joined by Glendora Scarfone, Caregiver Support and Administration, and Wendy Johnstone, Provincial Caregiver Program Consultant, to share a number of ideas when recognizing and supporting employee caregivers.
Hi, and welcome to Work and Care, a Balancing Act. I'd like to introduce Glendora Scarfone, Caregiver Support and Administration, and Wendy Johnstone, Program Consultant with the Family Caregivers Network. The Family Caregivers Network's been a charity in Canada for over 25 years as a champion for family caregivers, providing education support and a voice for family caregivers. One of the increasing areas of concern is the fact that so many people are working and caring at the same time, and that balancing act is a challenge. Wouldn't you agree, Wendy and Glendora, that most of us will be family caregivers, and that the majority of caregivers work full time?
Absolutely. And in fact, balancing caregiving and work is on the rise. So one of the areas that we certainly see here, even on Vancouver Island, is not only are employed caregivers looking after aging parents, but they still have young children at home. You can only imagine the number of hours required to take an aging parent to medical appointments, help with grocery shopping, making sure that they're accessing the healthcare system. And then on top of that, having to look at your children's needs as well. So soccer games, swim meets, helping with homework, getting to school, and trying to juggle that with a traditional work schedule from 9 to 5. So it's no wonder that 1 in 5 working caregivers report feeling strained, both emotionally, financially, and physically as well.
For sure, and just in the last week and a half, I've talked to 3 different caregivers with either children at home and aging parents running their own business, that sort of thing, and they're all talking about burnout and frustration and exhaustion and needing some extra supports to be able to balance their work and their caregiving and their family life.
That's what everybody's referring to as the sandwich generation, and so you're squeezed in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So some of the challenges that we come across with working caregivers are that in general in the workplace, 65% of employed caregivers, they still work a typical 9 to 5 work week. And although some employers are flexible, there's still certain work that has to get done within those working hours. And typically, elder care challenges are also in that 9 to 5. So medical appointments, any type of specialty appointments. And if you live in a more rural area, then sometimes those specialty appointments are out of town. And so having to take a half day or a full day off work to assist with an aging parent. What we do still find is that employees tend to prioritize work over family. And so there's a real struggle around ensuring that they're breadwinners, that they're doing a really good job at work, and that their families tend to become secondary. And we know that that leads to a lot of work-life conflict at the end of the day.
Can you talk about gender? Wendy?
Yes, yeah, gender. Actually, gender is really interesting because we're certainly seeing that men are taking on a more active caregiving role, and it's a lot harder for men perhaps to speak up in the workplace because it's not a traditional role that men might take as caregivers. And so they're often disadvantaged in their workplace in terms of the traditional view of men, in terms of the type of work that they do, leadership, being that sort of strong male type that doesn't get emotional about caregiving issues. And so if they're not recognized or supported, then they're often not going to even bring up the topic of caregiving. And then on the flip side, women, it's still a very traditional role. So they still do personal care. They tend to pass up promotions. They tend to work less hours because then they're also doing the childcare piece as well. And that can have, I think, an impact for women in terms of their own sort of personal growth and career, and feelings of guilt or feelings of not being able to be that superhero woman that tends to do it all. And I mean, I think even the three of us could even just speak to our own personal sense as women in the workplace who are caring for aging parents, or who have cared for aging parents, or who have young children or children. And we can certainly attest to those feelings as well. I don't know how you two feel about that.
Do you know, when my mom faced cancer, I worked in the best place in the world, the Family Caregivers Network, where you have a team and a whole group of people that know exactly what the issues are for you. And even then, it was really, really difficult with trying to be responsible to my job, but still let it go, and then be there and spend time with my mom while I could, and with my family. And it was awful.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I was in the best of situations from an employer and employee perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I can only imagine what other people face who don't have that level of support.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Barb, tell us a bit about why supporting working caregivers is good for business.
Recruitment and retention. That is the goal of any employers. Get good employees and keep good employees. It costs too much to do otherwise. And the cost is about $1.3 billion. When your employees miss work because they're caring, they either reduce their hours or they quit their jobs. So if you're really interested in maintaining a great skilled workforce, you need to pay attention to the people that are caring and that are your employees. Lost productivity amounts to about 520,000 hours each month for employed caregivers being absent due to care. That's a huge number, and that's going to cost employers for sure. Now, a growing issue is that we have an increase in the number of people that are caring who are employed, and so that will have that amount of impact will grow. The 1.3 billion is going to become a lot larger. So unless we get a handle on that in the workforce today, we're in serious trouble.
Mm-hmm. And so a lot of this comes down to how employers, businesses, what type of role they play in supporting caregivers, recognizing them, and in their overall well-being. So it's really interesting because when you look at the literature, the organizational culture plays a huge role. So if caregivers don't feel as though they can speak up or discuss their personal lives or the challenges they're facing, it has a negative impact on their ability to work. Now, the sad news is that the norm is that the culture in most organizations is that your personal life shouldn't affect your work life. So don't bring your personal business to work, keep it separate. We know that that can be really difficult to do when you have an aging parent that needs assistance and you need to be there for them during the day. Sometimes if that person's demented, they are going to be calling you at work, or if you need to speak to a physician or to the case manager and you have to have them call you at work, that's going to interfere with work hours as well. And then there's also this additional pressure from employees where they feel they need to be on 24/7. They need to be accessible to their workplace and to their employer. And that makes it even more difficult to feel supported and recognized if you feel like you're not able to talk about it. And there is this taboo around, we don't talk about elder care issues or personal problems that involve aging parents around the water cooler. And I think that we need to start talking about it more. We need to start saying to employers, supporting caregivers is going to mean better employees, more flexibility. At the end of the day, it's going to help the employers and maintain employee well-being and retention, and individuals who have great skill sets who can continue contributing to the organization. So Glendora, tell us a bit about recognizing and supporting working caregivers.
Well, if employers and HR associations came together and just start by recognizing that caregiving employees are going to, it's going to rise, it's going to be a continuous thing that's happening in employment situations. If they recognize that, start working together as employers, as HR associations, working alongside family caregivers to come up with some caregiver or some workplace strategies, programs, benefits, or policies that really help, first of all, build awareness that this is a growing trend in employment, and then it supports employees to be able to continue to be effective in their employment, to be a benefit to their employer, as well as balance out the family caregiving that they need to do. So if employers really understand that it's a great benefit to support family caregivers, it works for them and it works for their employees, then the whole working situation is going to be better as well.
And it's not just large corporate organizations. We're talking about small businesses. We're talking about individuals that might, or organizations that might only have 3 or 4 employees. So it's not meant for these large corporate organizations. I think it transcends all businesses, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there's lots of different opportunities and options. There's job sharing, there's working from home, remote employment, lots of different options that are already in place in small places and in larger corporations. So just exploring those options would be really helpful.
One of the we might want to talk about this a little bit later, but one of the challenges that I read in the literature was around managers. When there aren't clear policies set, it's difficult for them to make decisions, or they're just uncertain about what the next course of action is. And so I think, that's one area to start, is looking at what do other companies do? What are some of the benefits of those programs? How can you adjust those policies to fit the size of your organization, so that managers can then take a situation and say, oh, okay, we have a policy in place, or we have a guideline in place that we can refer to. What do you think, Barb?
I think, I mean, what we're hearing from a lot of the people that are talking to us about their struggles to balance work and care is that often they're getting a great deal of support from their direct supervisor. So even without a formal policy in place, it seems like people will bend over backwards when they know what you're going through, to a point. Mm-hmm. So if they're informally able to give you leave, or shift your schedule, or know that every lunch break you have to go and check or take to doctor's appointments, that's boding well. It's the humanity in the workplace that is day-to-day supporting people. But when it gets to the point where you need work leave provision, that's the tricky part. So with compassionate care leave, that's fantastic. We have that in Canada, but let's look at expanding that. And so some efforts across Canada are looking at being able to care for somebody beyond end of life and that limited number of weeks, because we know that caregiving isn't neat and tidy that way, is it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Glendora, can you talk a bit about recognizing and supporting working caregivers? What strategies both employees and employers can use?
Well, for employees, I think it's really important to have that conversation early on with your HR manager or your supervisor. Let them in on what's going on, and that's part of that whole cultural shift about being able to talk about it. But be clear about what you need. Let them know your situation, that you may need to leave at lunch, like Barb mentioned, to go and help your mom, check on your mom. You may need to look at some different options for getting them to appointments, things like that. So if you're up front right away, and tell them sooner than later, and don't wait for a crisis to happen, because then if a crisis happens and all of a sudden you have to disappear from your place of employment, that has a huge impact on everybody that's in there, and it leaves your employer hanging, per se, looking to cover your shift or your work. So be clear on what you need, and let them know that you have this obligation to provide care, and that's something that's important to you. So again, like Barb mentioned, making it more personal, that will really help an employer. And then an employee who wants an employer to be willing to compromise, to be flexible, then an employee needs to be able to do the same thing. Recognize that sometimes an employer is going to require you to be there, and you may have to be more flexible with your time as well. Mm-hmm. And then planning ahead for the unexpected, that can be done, both at home and in your job. So at home, we talk a lot to caregivers about understanding the progression of a disease, like let's say dementia, for instance. Mm-hmm. There's some real progression that happens. And so looking ahead, what supports do you need to have ready to be in place at home, so that you're planned ahead for that. And then on top of that, already talking about some strategies, job sharing and flexible time, et cetera, having those things in place already will help you to deal with the unexpected, so that you don't go into just crisis mode. You've already got something in place to do that. So, and just always remaining open to adjust as the situation changes, both in your employment and at your home and with your caregiving responsibilities.
Those are excellent points. One of the tips that we give working caregivers is if you have critical information about your aging parent or the individual who has a disability or your child that needs assistance, is to have a copy of all that information in your workplace as well, so that you don't have to worry about finding that information in a crisis, or it's handy so that it's going to take less time to have to work through that particular situation. And also, I think, you spoke a little bit about this, but sometimes employers might think that individuals are doing care by choice, like by personal choice. And so it's really important in a workplace is to show that you have a genuine obligation, that there are no other alternatives. You need to be that caregiver for that individual that requires care.
Right.
So from an employer's perspective, Glendora, what are some of the things that we're seeing that are helpful?
Well, the employer toolkit, of course, that we were talking about also has got all kinds of different potential workplace supports, ideas for employers. So, flexible work arrangements. I'm just looking at the toolkit now, informal or occasional flexibility, part-time work, temporary reduction of hours, flex time, et cetera. So if an employer has some policies, like we've talked about, some workplace policies in place already that they can offer a caregiver, then that will really help support a family caregiver. It also helps to maintain the dignity of an employee by recognizing that caregiving is a reality and having supports in place for them. So recognizing their role as a caregiver, all of those things are beneficial to a caregiver, to an employed caregiver. And having those solutions in place removes barriers. And so if you have those solutions in place, you're having those conversations, so that barrier is gone, that, it's not a taboo subject any longer. You've removed that barrier. And so just remaining open as well to how a family caregiver situation changes, and sort of trying to roll along with them and their caregiving role, then that really will support family caregivers.
I was really happy to know that the federal government put in place Employers for Caregivers table, which is going to has started the conversation, but to accelerate it and ultimately address the issues of making what is currently taboo a norm, so that everybody's comfortable and confident in being able to address the needs in the workplace.
Yeah.
Go ahead. We have a local municipality here who has our employer toolkit, and I've attended some of their employee wellness fairs and talked with the HR people, and they have all of these supports in place, and they really want to support their employed family caregivers. And they're recognizing that they have to continually have these conversations, because even though they have these strategies in place, the people that they know are caregiving are not accessing their support or these resources. So they know themselves that they have a lot of work to do to change that culture. So if employers can continually be open with employees, that's going to really help employee family caregivers reach out for those supports.
We're finding that employers are now coming to us at the Family Caregivers Network more and more about our Lunch and Learn education series, and it's both for the employer and the employee. And interestingly, with the sessions, where people in the past, we've been doing these for, I think, at least a decade, employees would not speak up whatsoever in the room. And what we're seeing is that they're doing a lot more speaking up, feeling more comfortable. So that bodes well. And the fact that the employer is interested in bringing in a lunch hour seminar is fantastic. So that's one solution that many employers can do for very little cost. It's employees' lunch hour and it's their choice, and it fits well with the schedule of most organizations. So one idea there.
A step in the right direction, isn't it?
Right.
Yes. So Barb, while you have the microphone, do you want to speak to some of the initiatives in Canada? I mean, I know there's many. We've just listed a few, but yeah, expand on some of that for us.
Oh, well, Glendora mentioned the toolkit for employers that we have, and it's posted on our website in a PDF format. And that toolkit was developed in conjunction with a number of employers in British Columbia who gave us feedback. Part of it was maybe the audience was supervisors, HR specialists, employee assistance specialists. And so through that process, this toolkit was developed. It's divided into two sections. One section is for the employee and the other is for the employers. And it addresses a lot of the things that you can do for no cost, low cost to help shift culture, and then moving into some policy and more formal changes that an organization can make. There's another in BC. Krista James led the Care and Work Law Reform to support family caregivers to balance paid work and unpaid caregiving, and it's a study paper, and it is excellent. It gives you a great detail. So if you're just beginning your search and want to dig into some of the areas of concern from legislation, check that out. And we have a number of other areas. Let's just skip down to the next slide, Wendy.
Sure.
Careware Workplaces in Manitoba. That's a great resource to check out. Sorry, can you go back to the previous slide? A really, really big study that I'm looking forward to seeing what's coming out over time with that is Caregiving and Work, the availability, accessibility, and perceived effectiveness of workplace supports for Canadian Caregivers project. That's 3 academic institutions and the Vanier Institute that are supporting this work. And I think we'll be following that along as things progress there.
I think it's great that we're looking at the evidence-based piece to supplement some of the on-the-ground work too. Is the more that we have evidence behind programs that are happening in the community, the more we can say, you know, this is one of the best places that we can start. We need to continue in this direction. We need to shift this based on the information and the feedback that we're getting from individuals who are actually in the workplace and caring at the same time. So I think it's great to see this shift moving forward.
Exactly. It is a complex public policy. I mean, we used to consider caregiving a private issue. It's a family issue. You look after your own family, and that's what we do. But those dynamics and the complexity have increased and making it less a private issue and more now of a public issue. Or in fact, is it everything all combined? So within this complexity, I think we'd boil it down into 3 things to think about. One is at the policy and legislation area, looking at leave provisions and making it legal for people to care, to recognize that it is not in fact a choice, but an obligation, right? And the second area is that regardless of where a family caregiver is, that they need support, and they need support around their own self-care, education, and ongoing ability to care. So there's the financial, the physical, and the emotional. And so within those areas, we need to keep working very hard to support family caregivers in Canada.
Well, and I think, I mean, the reality is that people perhaps are not aware, or they just simply forget, is that if you're a caregiver, you're doing 80% of the care that's required. And our formal system, our public healthcare system, is only doing 20%. And so if we want to retain individuals in the workplace, we're going to need to support them and recognize them. Because if they're already taking on that amount of work in an unpaid caregiving position, how can we expect them to care for children and continue to work productively in the workplace? It just seems ludicrous that we don't recognize it for what it really is.
I think it's similar to how many years ago getting time off for caring for your young child was an issue with employers, and we've seen that shift completely now. So hopefully we're on the same trend with people who are caring for aged parents.
Well, and I think one of the things that I'm impressed with recently is that there's lots of really good programs evolving that are education-based for caregiving. So it's looking at what skills do caregivers need, and actually giving them, especially in the areas of, dementia, or whether it's stroke, those sort of, some of those chronic illnesses or disease. But the other piece that I would like to see more of is perhaps more self-management programs for caregivers, and recognizing that piece too. It's great to have skills to look after the care recipient, but they're useless or not as effective unless we have the self-management strategies for the caregivers themselves.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
I hear.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, okay, carry on.
No, I was just going to take us to the last slide. So if you have anything to add in, jump in.
I'm really encouraged by a program or an initiative here in BC that's called the Patients as Partners Initiative. And it's really a philosophy and approach of person and family-centered care, or family and patient-centered care. And the traditional silo of healthcare is beginning to think in terms of partnerships with others. Who is it that might support better communities, better family support, better patient care ultimately? And part of the conversation that we're beginning to have is it's not only a healthcare issue. So if you're a patient and a family partner in healthcare systems change, in fact, employers play a part in that as well, in terms of bringing in the ability of people to care for each other. They are going to have to be able to be supported by their workplaces.
Mm-hmm.
So they're a big piece of the puzzle, employers.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So should we sum up with what's available at the Family Caregivers Network Society?
We have a caregiver support line, education and resource center, and all of the tools and resources that we referenced and more, including the content of the lunch and learns, our webinars. They're available online at our website, familycaregiversnetwork.org. The tools for employers is also available there, and please take a look at the toolkit. It's a great starting point if you're just beginning to consider how to either juggle working care or if you're an employer.
One of the things that I loved that I didn't realize about the website was that I can listen to the audio or the podcasts. Like I can download them, and then I was listening to them in my vehicle. And I think for individuals that commute, it's often a great way to listen to a 20-minute or 25-minute presentation on an elder care or family caregiving issue while you're commuting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah.
Lots of caregivers who do access those recorded webinars at different times when they're not working. And
Mm-hmm. That's super.
Good feedback.
I think
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just thought I'd mention the great work that the Canadian Caregiver Coalition is doing in connection and collaboration with many other organizations across Canada to mobilize action and collaborate on areas. Mm-hmm. And this is one topic area of collaboration to support family caregivers who are working and to engage employers in the issue as well. Good work.
Excellent.
We
just
looked at some sources in this presentation.
Yeah, just for people, they're interesting reads. They give some very interesting statistics and research information on work and caregiving.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.